Safe in a shipwreck. Peter traveled to different cities telling people the good news about Jesus, and many became believers. In many places, Paul began new churches for those new believers. He wrote letters encouraging them to learn about Jesus, more about Jesus, and to become more like him. But the leaders in the temple didn't like Paul for preaching about Jesus. They wanted to stop him. They called him a troublemaker and wanted to make his life very hard. During his life, Paul had been in prison many times and had been whipped and beaten, but there were times when he had gone without food or water. He had faced danger almost everywhere he went, but Paul wouldn't stop. He continued teaching the people and telling them the good news that Jesus is the Christ. Acts 5:42. The temple leaders finally succeeded in having Paul arrested. Now the government rulers could decide what to do with him. Paul talked to several rulers and a king. None of them thought Paul had done anything wrong, but Paul's enemies wanted him punished. After being in prison for 2 years, the king finally agreed to send Paul to Caesar, the emperor of Rome. Paul was soon on a ship with his Roman guard, Julius, who would make sure that he got to Rome safely. Some of the believers gathered to say goodbye to help their friend Paul. Some of them may have cried because they were afraid he would not return. And as the ship sailed away, Peter may have felt very sad too. As the shore faded into the distance, he saw for the last time the people and the places he loved so very much. After sailing for 2 days, Paul and Julius got off their boat and onto a bigger ship that filled with bags of dried grain and 276 passengers. The ship would take them all the way to Rome. But soon after leaving the port, the wind began to blow. The winter was getting closer, and it wasn't a good time for ships to be sailing on the seas. The wind began to blow harder, and the waves grew bigger. For many days the ship tossed from side to side. The ship creaked and groaned like it was going to break into pieces. The sailors did everything they could to save the ship. They threw the heavy bags of grain into the deep, dark ocean. They passed ropes around under the ship and tied them tight so the ship would hold together. They were desperate and afraid. "We are going to drown," they cried as they huddled together. Paul had encouraging news for everyone on the ship. "Do not be afraid. Last night an angel told me that nobody will die. Our ship will be destroyed, but everyone will live." Around midnight on the 14th night, the captain discovered that they were near an island. This was good news. The soldiers threw the anchors into the water to stop the ship. But as it drew closer to morning, Peter realized that no one had eaten much food in the past 14 days. Everyone was tired and worn out. He encouraged them, "You need to eat to survive. God has promised us that no one will die." He took some bread, thanked God for the food, and broke it into pieces and ate it. Paul helped the people see that God was in charge, and they began to eating some bread too. In the morning, everyone could see a sandy shore in the distance. The sailors cut the anchors loose, and the ship headed toward the island. But when it seemed like the ship was going to make it safely to the beach, it hit a pile of sand that had built up under the water along the shore. The ship was stuck. Giant waves pounded against the back of the ship, and it began to break apart. Some were able to swim toward the shore, while others held on to broken parts of the ship and struggled to shore. But no one died, just like God had promised. Some of the islanders who lived there came to make sure everyone was all right. They built a fire to help the people get warm and dry. While others were warming themselves by the fire, Paul searched for more wood to keep the fire burning. As he added a handful of sticks to the fire, a snake wiggled away from the heat. bit Paul on his hand and hung on with his fangs. The islanders were terrified. They were sure the snake's powerful poison would quickly start to work. There was nothing they could do to help Paul. But Paul just shook the snake off and went back to gathering wood for the fire and making sure that everyone was safe. Nothing happened to him. The islanders were amazed. Publius, the man who was in charge of the island, lived nearby. He heard what had happened and invited Paul to stay at his house. When Paul got there, he learned that Publius' father was very sick. Paul wanted to help the old sick man, so he prayed and asked God to make him healthy again. Immediately he was healed. Soon many of the others on the island heard about God, who had the power to save people from storms and heal sick people. Sick people from all over the island came to Paul to be healed. Many also came to hear more about this powerful God. Paul spent 3 months on the island, caring for people, healing them with God's power, praying for them, and teaching them about God's Son. Paul's enemies thought that by arresting him they would stop him from preaching, but nothing stopped Paul. None of his hard times, not prison, a shipwreck, or a snake bite. He was happy to help other people learn about God's love. Paul learned how to love others just like God loved him. He knew that it was important for the believers to know, so he wrote to them. Mostly what God does is love you. Keep company with him and learn a life of love. Love like that. Ephesians 5:1-2. God has sent us on a mission just like he sent Paul. We show and tell others the good news about Jesus. When we love and care for others, how can you love others like God loves you? What can you do to care for others? How can you tell them God loves you?